Hi, welcome to Revolution EV podcast. Today we have with us Nicholas Yeoh, Regional Head Southeast Asia for iCharging. Welcome to the podcast, Nicholas.
Hi, Mr. Mateen. It's very great to be on this podcast. Thank you for the invitation. Appreciate it. Look forward to our exchange.
Thank you for joining us for Revolution EV podcast, as well as let me tell our audiences that Nicholas has also joined us as a speaker for Revolution EV, slated for April of this year in Malaysia. Uh, Nicholas, before we proceed into more in-depth questions, I want to ask you about iCharging, what you do, what problems do you solve, and how do you help elevating the EV infrastructure and EV penetration all across the world?
Yeah, well, iCharging is a Portuguese-based company providing DC charging solutions. The company started in 2019, but the core of the team has really been in the business for the longest time, even before EVs were popular. And so the team is very familiar with everything that has taken place throughout the course of the EV history. They're in a very good position to be able to offer what the market is looking for right now and also in the future to come, because there are so many areas to electrify. And this is perhaps something we're going to discuss in the course of our exchange as well, that everyone is talking about electric vehicles as passenger vehicles, but there is so much more to be electrified. And that's why we see that there is plenty of opportunity for iCharging as a business, as a technology provider in DC EV chargers. Capacity for charging is getting larger, but the technology that is coming up as well is very interesting, because I think many people are viewing DC charging as a fairly in a very siloed way, in a very compartmentalized way. And I think I'm hoping that I can share some of our views as to how we view EV charging as a whole, and that there are many areas for us to explore.
When you talk about iCharging, so from what I understand, you're not just into EV segment, you're into multiple mobility segments for chargers.
That's right. That's right. We're looking to aid the electrification of transportation and mobility in general. And so it started off with passenger vehicles, but then there are many other areas for charging to be applied. For example, in the maritime industry, where these vessels are looking to be electrified as part of mandates in various jurisdictions, compliance in aviation. For example, the aviation industry is also looking to transform and electrify as well. So these are just the two examples, but the other one that really comes to mind as well is the mining sector. It's a huge industry, a lot of heavy equipment, a lot of heavy machinery, and a lot of that can be electrified, and it will help us to move towards our goals to decarbonize.
Of course. And I think this includes air transportation as well, because primarily transportation is land, air, and sea. So, of course, for land, there are EVs going around, whether those are passenger vehicles, whether those are electric vehicles, whether those are commercial vehicles in the EV segment. So, it's for land. Is electrifying the air mobility also something that is on cards for not just iCharging, but industry in a whole?
Well, I think so. I think that's sort of the area most DC charger manufacturers would go into. That would be a natural line for companies like ourselves to explore. In fact, we've actually signed a partnership deal with Eve Mobility, and Eve is a subsidiary of the company in Brazil called Embraer, the aviation company. And so these are some of the efforts from iCharging, some of our programs, as we want to work closely with these OEMs, whether it's OEMs in the automotive sector, in the aviation sector, or in the maritime sector. We want to be close to them to be able to understand what are some of the things that they're thinking about electrification, so that we can then pair our infrastructure to match with their direction.
Of course. Now, my question to you now is very specific to a specific region, since you are regional head for Southeast Asia. So, of course, Southeast Asia. Where do you see Southeast Asia right now in for adoption of EVs from the consumer side? B, the incentives that the governments are giving and how they're competing with each other. Let's say how a country like Malaysia is competing with Indonesia, how a country like Indonesia is competing with Thailand, how all these are competing. We're competing with Cambodia, for example. So, what is the penetration from the consumer side for EV? B, how the government's reacting, and C, how long or what is the future of EVs in the Southeast Asian market?
In my observation, I think there is an increased seriousness on the adoption of cleaner transportation in general. I think everyone recognizes that if they wish to reach their decarbonization goals, every different country will have their own goals, and some a little bit more aggressive than others. But if they were to achieve any of those goals, they will have to consider the electrification of transport to a certain degree. And so I think at this point in time, you've seen a lot of growth in the European regions, especially in China, in Asia as well, but Southeast Asia in particular, for say, let's call it the last 5 years or so, you see a lot of activity picking up. And I was extremely encouraged the last time I was at a conference that I spoke at in KL. That the environment, the atmosphere was actually quite different. That the seriousness has significantly picked up compared to maybe about 2 to 3 years ago. Now, I do acknowledge that there are some areas where, maybe certain regions, they have got targets, they've got goals that they've set up, but I think the policies are not quite aligned to it. It can also sometimes be a bit too much of a buzzword, decarbonization. Everyone wants to pick up that language now, but I think what really tells, absolutely, what really tells is the policies, whether they are aggressive enough. And it's not just policies in one area, but it's really policies in a number of areas. For example, from your manufacturing to what your subsidies are, and a number of other things as well. Sometimes even cooperation with other regions too, that will tell you how serious that particular region is. And for us, we feel that Malaysia is a very serious region at the moment, and that's why we are looking at this space very actively.
100%. When we started with Revolution EV, one of the questions was where to actually put this event, because the event positioning is right, and we knew that the Southeast Asian market is an upcoming market, and within it as well, we found out we spoke to the office of the Deputy Prime Minister in Malaysia as well, and a lot of things came up, a lot of things that we understood from the market, and that's why it's happening in Malaysia, because we see that there's a lot of traction from not just the government side, even though the subsidies are low currently. Or the internal combustion engine makes more sense financially. But I think the Malaysian market is getting there. I think when the ball swings, it will swing higher very quick.
I also think that the timing of it is great as well. And of course, it's not to sit on your laurels for too long, but it's given the region quite a bit of time to sort of observe and understand the use cases of various regions and see how they have worked. Some things have not worked. We appreciate that there were some recommendations, some suggestions, some technologies that have been introduced but have not taken off. And so I think this region has a lot to study from, and it's great. But of course, you don't want to overstudy and then nothing gets going. But I see Malaysia has a great balance of both, and now it's a time where I see the movements starting to pick up. I mean, I have to say as well that the one that is most active in the whole of Southeast Asia is probably Thailand at this point in time, which is why we've got some activities that we're sort of exploring in that space as well. But yeah, the whole space, this whole region is buzzing, and many European companies or companies outside of Asia are looking at the very least they're curious about what's happening in this space. And 𝐼𝐶harging, being a fairly new company in this part of the world in Asia, I think we've made some fairly good strides. We've taken some fairly good strides as far as penetrating the market, getting our brand out there, getting ourselves known, and how we as to how we differentiate ourselves from the pack.
100%. I wanted to ask you a specific question. We understand China has a dominance in a lot of spheres when it comes to different industries, and EV charging is one as well. So I want to understand how China's manufacturing, A, and then China's technology is aiding the adoption of EV across Southeast Asia.
Yeah, I think in China, if China locally itself, you will see recently that there's a lot of talk about increasing their battery swapping technology. I think that's probably the way that they are trying to increase the uptake of EVs in the region. And I think China uniquely, they are positioned to do this because they've got a large market size, and so even if nobody else outside of China is interested, I think they've got enough of that market to be able to introduce a solution that might be unique for their region, and that's a great market to be participating in. China is a huge market. I don't know if some of those things that they're introducing might be relevant to outside of China as much. Time will tell, obviously, but we think that as a charger manufacturer is concerned, today you will find that chargers come in many different options. You have got a range of even DC chargers. In the past, there were many AC chargers, but then now even DC chargers options are flooding the markets, and it's becoming more and more challenging to find good solutions because everyone is pretty much the same. They're selling the same thing, they're selling the same specs, but you're wondering now what is going to be right for your environment. And that's why I think that countries in Southeast Asia, as they are planning out their infrastructure, and as they look at the capacities that they need to cater for in the future, as well as the other industries that they're looking to electrify down the track, I think it's a good time for them to understand what type of use case they have and what needs they have from an infrastructure standpoint, and pick a solution provider who is able to meet that, who is able to meet their needs. And I'm not going to speak about other suppliers out there, but from an iCharging standpoint, what we understand over the many years since the early 2010s, that we've been part of this market, and we've seen what the different regions would require, and therefore tailor our product so that it's able to help the users grow conveniently, add capacity conveniently, and so that they don't get stuck. Because after all, we're still in a very transient period. One of the reasons why EVs are not taken up as quickly is also because everyone's waiting for that next model to come up. We know that the next model is better than the previous, and that's why you do have a little bit of an issue with the second-hand car market right now, where many of the older models, they can't move because the technology have lagged so far behind. So as we are moving through this transitionary period, how do we then design solutions where the charge point operators will be able to not burn themselves to the ground and have very low utility rates where they cannot sustain this business, but also have the flexibility to be able to add as and when they need to scale according to the market. So that's really the mentality that iCharging has put on as we develop our products.
Yeah. I completely agree with your viewpoint, considering that it is the iCharging's viewpoint, and you have been in the business for long to understand how the market is heading and how the market is reacting to certain interventions, not just from the charging side, from other relevant, and I'll say battery is equally important for a charging company. So is battery swapping, so are cables, so are semiconductors, so is everything else. Now, I have a question for you, Nicholas. It is that, do charging manufacturers or charging service providers or charge point operators still see fleet management companies or fleet operators as a larger customer base? or has it changed over the last few years?
For us, all of it is really a market to be explored. And I say this because everything is still in that, we're still in that transient period. So I do believe that the fleets are still very attractive, because if you get a contract for a fleet of buses, for example, or maybe a large fleet of a large corporation, that can be very attractive. And if you think about the mining space, for example, they've got fleets that is enormous, so you cannot ignore that. But I think in order for it to all move together, you have to I think many businesses have started with the fleets, and I think that's a good idea, especially say, for example, with public transportation. The more you encourage the public transportation, the more visibility you will get. People will start becoming more comfortable with the idea of the electrification of vehicles. And so I think that is a natural step, a natural progression for you to introduce to the masses. And it starts with the fleet. Also because the fleet has a much more controlled environment. You know that you're dealing with one particular company. I know they go to many different locations, but you can still have a boundary that is fairly controlled, where you're then able to provide your services a lot more. It's a lot more controlled, I will say.
I completely agree with your point there, Nicholas. I personally feel fleets in general provide an opportunity for all the EV segment companies to make it scale, sell it scale, service it scale, and then eventually at the end of life, procurement at scale. And there's a saying, when there's only one owner for a particular asset, it tends to live longer.
Yeah.
On the longevity side, how do you think the investment in the EV space or in the charging space is coming along in Southeast Asia, or generally around the world? Where the funds moving from, where the funds moving into?
Well, I think anyone who wants to get into this space have to have enough lung capacity to play the long game. You do have to be able to hold your breath, I think, a little bit, because just like how the telecom industry, those ones who build towers and all that, and build up infrastructure for the telecom space, they weren't going in there to make a quick buck. It was really for the long-term view. Yes, and you will see that utilization in Southeast Asia remains fairly low. And I think this is something that a lot of charge point operators maybe didn't quite understand in the earlier days. I think now the understanding is much better, that if you go in, you have to be able to understand the readiness of the market and be prepared to go into this for the long run. One of the things, actually, I might take this opportunity to just say what we have done to try and help with this fairly long investment is I think you probably would have seen the design of our chargers. The kiosk that we designed has actually got a 32-inch display, and that 32-inch display is a touch screen that is very configurable, so that when the charger is not in use, you can actually have a screen there for ads. You can display whatever you want, right? And so there is actually a potential there to work with marketing companies, or certain organizations to be able to display some of their ads, and that could actually serve as an alternative revenue stream for some of these charge point operators. So we try to implement clever things like this, so that you kill two birds with one stone. On one hand, it's a fantastic interface, very easy for users to use as they charge the vehicle. They're not squinting their eyes at this little display there, trying to figure out, especially with the bright light shining on that tiny little LCD, what's going on with their charge session. Whereas you've now got this 32-inch display on an iCharging kiosk, where you are able to see everything very clearly. So the interaction with the charger is fantastic, but also you get this additional benefit of being able, as a charge point operator, to be able to use that as an additional stream of revenue while you wait for the utility of your chargers to pick up. So again, that's the long version of it. But I guess coming back to your question about the investment side of things, I think people are really starting to see and be encouraged by the policies that are set by the various governments. And I think that's where it all starts. If you've got a government that is strong enough and determined enough to go in that direction and stay the course, then I think it will give the investors that confidence to invest in that particular market. And then at that point, they will also appreciate that, okay, there is actually longevity to this. This is not just a government that's going to issue a policy today and then change its mind, maybe 2 years down the track, and what's going to happen to all my investments. I think that's very important for a CPO or an investor who wants to invest in this market to have that confidence to put money in, and that really comes from the policies from the top.
100%. I completely agree. Usually what happens, government is a driver to a direction. It's the government who paves the way, and the corporates, the companies, the startups, the people who just make it, drivable or make it sensory enough. But
Now,
again,
having said that, I don't think that the government should do this perpetually. It is more of this initial stage where we're getting the market warmed up, getting everybody used to this idea of transitioning towards a cleaner transportation. I think the government's role is important. But once that phase is over, then I think the private market will be able to take things on its own, and it will be a lot more self-regulating.
Yeah, I completely agree. Nicholas, my last question to you would be to let our audience know about the 5 trends that you think over the next 5 years in the EV and the charging space. Where do you think it's headed over the next 5 years, and what are the top 5 trends that we can see in the years to come?
Well, I'll give you a couple. I don't know if I can give you 5 particular trends, but these ones that I give you might be broad enough to be able to go into, I guess, sub-trends, and they all have their own rabbit holes to be explored. I think the first thing is to not be, you don't want to think about just electrifying passenger vehicles, because there are electrification of many other industries that are taking place as we speak. They might be still a little bit new in people finding the standards and the way to regulate those spaces. So that is in discussion. You've got bodies like, for example, 𝐸𝐴, who creates standards for these various industries to use, and these are all very helpful as we develop standards for the electrification of various industries. So I think not just to be too siloed on passenger vehicle electrification, but also looking at marine, aviation, mining, and many other, even the agriculture business as well, with all this heavy machinery. All of that can be electrified as well. And if you have a battery, you will need to charge. So that is something to look out for. The other thing I would point out as well is that many people look at a DC charger these days, or even a general charger, as a very commoditized piece of equipment. But what I think people are missing is that the software that is paired with these chargers is really going to be what sets those particular brands apart. With us, we actually sell, we put a lot of focus in designing the hardware of the charger, making sure that it's reliable and robust. But the thing that we are doing most, and the most of our investment these days going into our R&D, is really in the pairing of the software with it. So that, for example, a charge point operator who buys a standalone DC charger, for example, they might just be getting a charger. But once you've deployed your charger and you deploy many of them, what you want to make sure is to be able to have that connectivity with your chargers. So to be able to know what is happening with your asset in the field is extremely important, and you will feel perhaps a lot more in control of your asset if you know what's happening there. And so we have got what we call our My iCharging portal, so that every iCharging charger that is deployed out there, the operators will be able to have a very good understanding of exactly what's happening. Even before you go to site to do the service, you already know exactly what's happening from the back room that you're controlling all these chargers from. So that is one area. Obviously, being able to pair it with renewable energy as well. You don't usually go and buy, as you have more and more of these charge parks being developed, the solar panel is not the main feature of it. The charge park is the main feature, to be able to charge the car. So you want to buy a charger, but at the same time you want it to be able to connect with renewables as best as possible, whether it's an energy storage element, whether it's a solar harvesting element, maybe even if you want to integrate some sort of wind technology to it. The software that we provide allows our users to be able to pair all these other supplementary resources to power the chargers in a much more convenient way, so that when you deploy, it's much easier. We take away the pain of deployment and scaling up, and so that's how with software we're able to we're investing in enough software for our customers to be able to have a painless deployment to all these assets that they have, especially with the numbers growing so quickly. That's what we are focusing on.
So I think I can boil it down to three things: standards, multi-industry, and focusing on software is going to be the trend for upcoming years for us.
You said it better than I did. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you for sparing time for us. I look forward to interacting with you more and looking to meet you in KL in April.
Likewise. Thank you very much for your time and appreciate this exchange. Thank you.
Thank you so much. See you. Bye-bye.